Will the heroes of the multiverse be willing to put their differences aside with the Lord of Apocalypse if it means defeating the Great Darkness? Well, let's find out together, shall we, as we hop into the pages of Justice League Incarnate issue number 4, the penultimate issue in this Joshua Williamson series. So then, as we open up the book, I would ask you all kindly to pull out your tickets because the retcon train is pulling into the station, and oh boy is it a full one this week. Choo choo. Now, stop me if you've heard this one before, but in the beginning there was nothing but darkness until eventually that darkness was overtaken by light. But not 100%. There was a small tiny crack in that light. And from this one tiny little crack ended up spilling forth the entire DC multiverse as we know it, complete with all the different Earths. And no, before you even have to ask, I thought Perpetua did all the Earths. Yeah, well, apparently not anymore. This would also be the beginning of the eternal struggle between the Great Darkness and the Light. A battle that would end up taking multiple different forms over the millennia, including the very first Crisis on Infinite Earths, wherein Mar-Navu, charged by the Light to watch over all things, ended up doing battle with the Anti-Monitor who had been cursed by the Great Darkness. A peace would ultimately be reached by the darkness and the light. The dark would slumber and the light would pull back its radiancy. For the darkness was itself not inherently evil, it only seeked complete and utter nothingness like that which existed at the beginning of time. The darkness would slumber, but hey, guess what? Darkness can't be trusted, because instead it decided to make use of its great empty right hand, the Gentry. Through the empty hand, the Great Darkness managed to pull strings from behind the scenes and nudge forward all the other villains of all the other crises, the famous ones you remember and even the minor ones you don't, into doing its bidding. One of the only villains the Great Darkness couldn't actually nudge along was Darkseid. The King of Apocalypse was cosmically aware himself and always knew what was really at stake. Not that it helped him all that much, as Darkseid would end up meeting his end during the events of Final Crisis, only for the Great Darkness and its agents to resurrect him once again, hoping that Darkseid could weaken the Light for them in their ultimate takeover. It was around this time too the Great Darkness began to realize that it wasn't the Light that was its greatest enemy. In fact, it was what came after, the superheroes. Time and time again, the Great Darkness was thwarted by DC's greatest heroes, and because of that, the Great Darkness decided to get a little bit more creative, influencing a quantum being, Dr. Manhattan. The Great Darkness sought to steal years worth of life from the superhero community, turning them dark and dour. Naturally, that plan was also thwarted, but now, after the Metal Wars, the Great Darkness saw another opportunity to complete its plan of ushering in an age of nothingness. In fact, hey, as we discover, it's Dr. Multiverse who's been telling us this whole story this whole time, has actually been empowered by the multiverse itself to heal it, fix the crack, and make it so the Great Darkness can't succeed again. Unfortunately, Dr. Multiverse also feels the only way that they're going to be able to defeat the Gentry and the Great Darkness's return is if they join forces with Darkseid. After all, he's incredibly powerful and has an army at his back, while meanwhile the poor members of Justice League Incarnate are separated to the winds. Darkseid might very well be evil, but even someone as bad as Darkseid fears a state of infinite nothingness that the Great Darkness plans to bring. And make no mistake, the Great Darkness is indeed growing more powerful as Thomas Wayne actively attempts to kill Dr. Multiverse by poisoning her, only for the good guys to realize too late that he's been compromised. Darkseid decides to end his life with some Omega beams in a scene that is no doubt referencing another famous Darkseid Batman meeting. Darkseid, feeling that he can wait no longer, opts to take the crack from Dr. Multiverse and go to meet the Gentry in open battle. The heroes of the League are understandably quite despondent. They don't know how they're going to win this battle, and even if Darkseid ends up winning it for them, they're still all ultimately screwed. Figuring they have no options left, they vow to make the very dangerous trip to Earth-7 to try and reunite with the House of Heroes and their friends, even though they don't know what will be waiting for them on the other side. Meanwhile, how does Darkseid and his forces fare against the Gentry and the Open Hand? Well, at first they're doing pretty good until Darkseid decides to use the crack to stab the Empty Hand in the heart. Only here's the thing though, Darkseid, for all of his blustering, may actually end up being the greatest puppet the Great Darkness has ever known. You see, the Empty Hand says his hand is empty no more, and that they needed the crack to power their Oblivion machine to undo Superman's great wish from Final Crisis. That's all pretty bad, but believe me when I say say things actually get a little worse. Justice League Incarnate makes their way to the crashed House of Heroes only to be ambushed by zombified versions of their teammates turned against them by the Great Darkness. And so that was Justice League Incarnate issue number 4, everybody, and honestly I'd be lying if I said this didn't feel like a hell of a lot to take in. Enjoyable stuff, but a lot to take in. Once again, like Infinite Frontier, this story ends up falling into that very famous DC Comics trope where continuity is the story. Joshua Williamson is once again doing a lot of house cleaning at DC Comics, basically wiping away a lot of stuff people didn't like from Snyder's time on the Justice League book and all the changes he made to the multiverse. While also, interestingly enough, also keeping a lot of stuff from Jeff Johns' run. I know there was a point there at DC where it felt like every writer was trying to tell some big epic multiversal tale about the very nature of the DC multiverse. And I mean, geez, they can't all be true at once, can they? So I guess you have to leave it to someone like Joshua Williamson to pick and choose what's gotta stay, what's gotta go, while also building a much bigger meta-narrative about the Great Darkness that seems to kind of be the background thread in all of the different books he's been writing at DC right now, which is kind of cool, honestly. Honestly, I gotta wonder, are they really going to be able to finish a story this big feeling in just one more issue, or are we actually reading the middle part of a much bigger storyline? Probably the latter. Overall, I'd give this one another 8 out of 10. Love it or hate it, this book really did end up becoming one of the most important things on the DC shelf right now. Hey there everyone, it's your pal Cape Joel again, and if you're seeing my face right now, that means you watched to the end of the video, and I'll always be grateful for that. Retention helps in this crazy YouTube game, and so does becoming a patron. If you head on down to the description, you can find a link to my Patreon page. Recently just redid all the tiers, a lot of cool stuff offering up there, exclusive commentaries, exclusive polls, behind the scenes concept art for Capes and Quest, that's the brand new D&D show I've started soon. Never been a better time to become a patron. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month and help the channel grow and, help me continue to deliver content like what you just saw. So I want to thank you all, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.